So, it is the 30th of July, which means that Newts are just 2 days away, and so I thought it was about time that I did my TBR, especially now that Yalc is over and I did do a bit of a book buying binge as anticipated. So I have my Wizarding Careers booklet, and as with the owls, I am going to go for the librarian career, which means that I need to achieve an O in Ancient Runes, an E in Defence Against the Dark Arts, and an E in History of Magic. So that's a total of 7 books. But because I did manage to pass all of my OWLs, I thought I'd challenge myself to cross-qualify into Hogwarts Professor as well. So to do that, I do still need an E in Defence Against the Dark Arts. I need an O in the subject that I wish to teach, which, if I'm being honest, wouldn't be Ancient Runes. So I would prefer to teach Charms. So I'm going to attempt to achieve an O in Charms as well. And then you also need 2 A's in 2 alternative subjects, which I can then just use Ancient Runes and History of Magic for, that I am doing to O level and E level for librarian. Anyway, so essentially what I'm doing is I'm challenging myself to read 10 books instead of 7. So I went to my trusty Hello Kitty notepad and I planned it all out, and I'm going to take you through the books that I plan to read. But what I will say is that I do have backups for all of these. I'm a mood reader, so I've set this TBR based on what I think I'm going to want to read, but it might change. And also, I've been quite challenging with myself. Most of these, well, all of these are pretty big books, with the exception of a couple. They're mostly like over 400 pages each. So that plus 10 books in a month might be a little tricky, especially because I know that I have a really busy work month ahead of me. So we'll see. I'm gonna leave myself the option of swapping to some manga and things if I need to. But to start things off, I need an outstanding in Ancient Runes. So for my acceptable level, I am going with Ash Princess. The prompt for this one was to read a recommended read, and this one was recommended by Elliot Brooks from the channel Elliot Brooks. And this book is a fantasy book that I believe is quite tropey, but we follow the heir to a throne who had to watch her mother murdered and is now living under the control of her mother's murderer. And I don't know much else about it other than that, but Elle and I have fairly similar reading tastes, and she enjoyed it and said that it was quite a light fantasy read. So although it's quite a thick book, it's 432 pages, I am hoping that because it's slightly lighter fantasy and more trope-filled fantasy that I'll be able to get through it reasonably quickly. For Exceeds Expectations, I need to read a book in the past tense. So for this one, I'm going with American Royals by Catherine McGee. This is actually well, it's a proof copy. I don't know whether proof is another word for advanced reader copy or whether it's just an early print of a book that's been through all rounds of editing. It says uncorrected bound proof, so I'm guessing not. I think that it's an ARC, but I'm not 100% sure. If anybody knows the difference between a proof and an ARC, let me know, because they were on about proofs a lot at Yalc and I just have no idea what the difference is, if there even is one. But anyway, this is an advanced reader copy. It says that it's out on the 5th of September, so by the time I wrap this up for you in my end of the month wrap up after the Newts, if you're interested in it, you won't have very long to wait until it's out, if at all, because I'm not necessarily going to get my wrap up out on like the 1st of September. So this is a contemporary novel, which, although it's quite thick, and by the way, since when do proofs have sprayed edges? How cool is that? It's got 440 pages, so it is quite thick, but also because it's contemporary, I tend to read contemporary a little bit quicker. And I just got given this at Yalc, so I have no idea what it's about actually. I checked that it was past tense and that's about all I did. So Let's read the back together, shall we? Meet the Washingtons, the most scandalous royal family ever. The rebel, Her Royal Highness Prince Samantha, is only second in line to be Queen of America, so no one minds too much who she dates or how hard she parties. The heir, it helps that her sister, Princess Patrice, is literally perfect. Bea is demure, sweet and beautiful, and she knows that the crown always comes first, doesn't she? The schemer. Daphne Dayton might be newly noble, but she won dashing Prince Jefferson's heart once, and she'll do anything to get back into the court's favour and his bed. The nobody. If only Daphne knew that her greatest competition is a plain little commoner, Nina Gonzalez, a part-time librarian who just wants to stay out of the spotlight. Together, these four young women must navigate the drama, gossip, scheming and sizzling romance of the most glorious court in the world. There's everything to play for, but there can only be one queen. So that sounds kind of interesting and very, very tropey and like it's going to be way over dramatic, which isn't something that I read a lot of, so we'll see how that goes. Then for the outstanding grade for Ancient Runes, I need to read a book that has been on my TBR for ages. And for this one, I am going with The Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan. I've probably got other books that have been on my TBR for longer than this one, but this is the one I've been wanting to get to since it came out last year, basically. And I don't know why I haven't read it yet. So I'm gonna. If you don't know what this one's about, have you been living under a rock? It is about a woman who is essentially one of the king's courtesans. So every year the king of this land chooses a paper girl to enter into his court and for him to do what he wants with. Really, this is meant to be really quite heavy on the sexual abuse front, so warning about that. I'll be able to give you more detail about that once I've read it, but I do know that already. And I do know that there is a female-female romance in this, and that our protagonist is a fire girl instead of a paper girl, but I don't really know what that means because I haven't read it yet. So I've been wanting to read it for ages and I'm really looking forward to getting to it. Then Charms is the other subject that I need to achieve an outstanding in. So starting off with the acceptable level, I need to read a book with a gorgeous cover. And for this one, I am going with The Kingdom by Jess Rothenberg. And I mean, the cover game has been amazing recently anyway, and I'm pretty sure any of these could pass for that, but I do think that this is a particularly pretty cover as well. And what I understand this book to be about is a mix of Westworld meets Disneyland meets Robots on Trial. I don't know if that helps you. It doesn't really help me all that much other than to make me want to read it. So there you go. Then for Exceeds Expectations, you have to read a manga or a comic or a graphic novel, or basically something that is under 150 pages long. And I have quite a few options for this, and I'm not really going to limit myself because I will just pick up whichever one strikes my fancy. So I have Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, I have Full Metal Alchemist, I have Maid Sama, I have Land of the Lustrous. I've got loads of manga, and I will link you to my video where I showed you my manga collection, which I did recently, so you can see that if you want to see what all of my options are for this, but I'm not going to pick something specific. I will just decide on the day what I fancy. And then for the outstanding in Charms, you need to read a paperback book, and for this one I am going with Jelly by Claire Rees, and this is a book that I also got at Yalc, and it's actually not supposed to be out until next month, I believe. I'm not 100% sure, but because Claire Rees was attending Yalc, they provided some early copies for people to buy, and I've been really wanting to read this until I heard about it when I was reading up about Yalc initially. Essentially, what this is about is people stranded on the back of a giant killer jellyfish, and they are within sight of land but have no way of getting there, and we follow what they do in that situation. And it just sounds like such a fascinating and different type of book, and not something I don't read a lot of like disaster type books, because I mean disaster films irritate me, so I just don't tend to lean towards disaster books, but this one just sounds so fascinating that I can't help myself, I need to read it. For Defense Against the Dark Arts, I need to achieve an exceeds expectations, but I'm going to tell you all the way through to outstanding, just in case by some miracle I get time to do all 3 books for this particular subject. So for acceptable, the challenge is to read a book with a black hardback. So it's a black under the dust jacket book. So for this one I am going with Romanov by Nadine Brands. And this is a book that I'm not sure that I could explain what it's about any better than the synopsis, so I'm just going to read you that. The history books say I died. They don't know the half of it. Anastasia Nastia Romanov was given a single mission to smuggle an ancient spell into her suitcase on her way to exile in Siberia. It might be her family's only salvation, but the leader of the Bolshevik army is after them, and he's hunted Romanov before. Nastia's only chances of saving herself and her family are either to release the spell and deal with consequences, or to enlist help from Zash, the handsome soldier who doesn't act like the average Bolshevik. Nastia has only dabbled in magic, but it doesn't frighten her half as much as her growing attraction to Zash. She likes him. She thinks he might even like her. That is, until she's on one side of a firing squad and he's on the other. And it does indeed have a black hardback. So, and it's actually pretty short. I'm quite surprised actually. I hadn't seen a copy. I've heard of it and I'd read the synopsis before, which is what made me want to read it, but I'd never actually seen a copy of it until I got to Yalk, and when I picked it up I was actually quite surprised by the length of it. So it's actually only 328 pages, which is fairly short for a fantasy book. So I'm a little bit nervous because it is historical fiction as well as fantasy, which is a little bit worrying because it's not something I usually like. But I don't really know much about Russian history, and really primarily it's like World War I and II historical fiction that I'm not a fan of, and this is, you know, Russian history. And I actually really like the Disney film Anastasia, so hopefully I'll be fine. For Exceeds Expectations, the prompt was Gilderoy Lockhart's memory charm. Grab a pen and write down the first book from your TBR that comes to mind. And the first time I tried that, my mind went completely blank and I couldn't remember a single book on my shelf that I haven't read yet. And that happened quite a few times. And then this book came into my head, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is kind of a nightmare because it's huge. It's not huge. It's about 650 pages, but that's pretty long when you're trying to read 10 books in a month. So yeah, that's what I'm reading for this one, and this is the only one that I don't have a backup for because there's not really an option to have a backup. But if I'm like not gonna get a chance to get to it, I might just pick something else and cheat a bit. But I mean, I've been wanting to read it for a while, so I guess I am. Crikey. And for Outstanding, if I get a chance to get to it, the prompt is to read a book set in England or written by an English author. And again, I had quite a few options for this one. I've picked The Lost Princess by Connie Glynn because firstly it's reasonably short, and also I know because I've read the first 2 books in this series that it's a reasonably quick read. It's light, fluffy, very young adult mystery type story, so it's not too onerous in terms of getting through it. Then for History of Magic, again I only need an Exceeds Expectations in this subject, but I've planned for all 3 just in case I get there. For Acceptable, it is to read a fantasy, and for this one I'm going with The Wicked Fox by Kat Cho, which I am super excited to read, and I think you'll agree that it is a absolutely stunning cover, so it could have fit for the gorgeous cover prompt as well. And if I'm going to struggle to read both this and The Kingdom, then I can swap this in for that, and then I have some shorter fantasy books and I have some middle grade fantasy books that I could put into this spot to help cut down the reading. But I'm really excited to read this one. I've just realised I haven't told you what this or this is about. This is the life story of a character named Kavoth, and I don't know any more about it than that. And I don't really want to. I think a lot of people say that you should really go into it knowing as little as possible, because it's a very meandering story about somebody's life from childhood. So, and then this one, because it's a final book in a series, I can't tell you specifically what this one is about, but the series follows Ellie and Lottie. Ellie is a princess who is undercover, and Lottie is a girl who is obsessed with princesses, and so Lottie pretends to be Ellie to protect Ellie's identity. This one is about a nine-tailed fox named Myong, and she survives by consuming the souls of human men, and because of her half-human soul she feels kind of bad about that, so she does the whole vigilante thing and only consumes the souls of evil men. And then she comes across a boy who she saves, and in the process of saving him loses her fox speed, which means she loses her fox magic, and that also means that she's going to die. So they have to work together to try and get her fox speed back. And it's Korean inspired, and that's really different, and I'm really excited to read it. Then for an Exceeds Expectations, I have to read a book that includes a map. And honestly, I really struggled to pick something for I struggled to pick something for all of these because they are so broad. There's so many things on my shelves that could potentially fill that prompt, but that's good because it means that if I need to swap things around then I can. For now I've gone with The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, which has been on my TBR for a long time as well. I've heard lots of very good things about this one. Mixed reviews on The Wicked King, which is book 2, but I mean, this one seems to be fairly universally liked, which is good. And I think, from what I've heard, even though it's reasonably longish, it's meant to be a fairly quick read. And it does indeed have a map. So I'm going to give it a go and hopefully I'll be able to get through it. But I am a bit concerned because a lot of these books are pretty big. So like I said, I'm leaving it open to move things around. And then the final prompt for History of Magic for my outstanding in that subject is to reread a favourite. And again, I've got a couple of options to this. I may reread Orange, which I actually read for the first time during the Owls, so I kind of quite like the symmetry of that, of reading it in the Owls and then reading it again for the Newts, and I did absolutely love it, and it was manga, or it is a manga, so it is quite quick to read through. Or I could reread one of the Mediator books, since I'm rereading that series at the moment anyway. And that's it. And if I somehow manage to read all of that, which I don't think is going to happen, then I can of course try and do some other challenges as well. But that is my TBR for the Newts. Wish me luck, because I think I'm going to need it, especially with The Name of the Wind. I'm a bit gutted that that's on here, to be honest, because I think that it's really going to cut into my reading time for the other prompts, and I do really want to still read everything else. But Defence Against the Dark Arts is one of my mandatory subjects for both professions, so I'm going to need to read it, and I am excited to read it. I just hope it doesn't stop me from reading everything else. If you're doing the Newts as well, please let me know, and let me know what you're reading, what you're most excited to read, what you're most worried about reading. Are you excited? What career are you going for? I want to know everything. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks, bye!